In today's video, we're going to be looking at how to get your sculptures symmetrical and how to stop them from looking like a sack of potatoes. My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So the reason that I'm making this video is because one of you lovely people that follow my channel has contacted me and they've said to me that they really struggle to get their needle felting work kind of looking symmetrical, looking even, and that sometimes it ends up looking like a bit of a sack of potatoes. So I've got some really great hints and tips for you now to get your work looking super symmetrical, not like a sack of potatoes, and give it a really professional overall finish. So let's look at tip number one. Tip number one, this is when you're creating ball shapes or anything without an armature.
The first trick to get your sculptures looking a lot more symmetrical and less like a sack of potatoes is to do the rolling method. So this would be for anything that's ball shaped, like these two needle felted balls here, or anything that you don't have an armature in that's easy to roll between your hands. So all I do with this, as you can see, this is all looking a little bit lumpy and unpleasant. I'm just going to take it between my hands. I'm going to give it a roll. And what this does is it warms the wool between your hands, so it helps the fibres to muddle together more thoroughly. And it's also distributing the wool that's inside, all these lumpy bits of wool that are inside, it helps to distribute them around the ball so you get a much more even, more spherical ball. And then once you've rolled it between your hands for a little while, just go back to your felting needles. I would always tend to use fine needles and then just go back in and felt it down again. And just keep rolling it as you do it. So don't spend ages on one side, because then you're guaranteed to have one side that looks different to the other side. So the trick is with any ball-like shape to keep moving it and turning it round. So you're felting the entire ball and getting a nice even felt all over it. And then just keep checking it for symmetry. So just hold it back, just look at it, give it another roll, and then go back in again. So this is a really easy way of getting a nice symmetrical ball shape, and you'll get a nice even finish to your work, and you'll get rid of all those horrible lumps and that potatoey kind of finish that a lot of people really hate.
Tip number two, this is when you've got a sculpture with or without an armature and things are looking a little bit wonky and how to correct them.
So this next tip that I have for you to get your work looking a lot more symmetrical and a lot smoother is the squeezing technique. And this is for when you're shaping your work. So if you're making an animal or something like that, and you need to create some symmetrical shaping to your creature, then this is what you need to do. Just look at where you want to create the shaping. So say for instance, I wanted to shape his head and I wanted to taper it. All I'm going to do is use both of my fingers and I'm going to squeeze and push it in. Now, the nice thing about wool, especially wool bats, is unlike clay, when you squeeze something into place, eventually it will spring back into its original form. Whereas if you do it with clay and you squeeze it, you're kind of stuck then. And if it's not working and it's not very even, it can look a bit ugly and then it's a bit of a nightmare to correct. But wool doesn't have that problem because it's nice and squishy and bouncy. So as you can see, the joy of this is you can squeeze things into shape and then you can felt them down so they hold their shape for a time, and it gives you enough time to felt everything down into the position that you want without it permanently being in that position. So say for instance I wanted to create more of a chest shape here, I just use my fingers and I'd squeeze this downwards. If I show you on the side, it'll be easier to see. So I'm going to squeeze this downwards to create this kind of chest-like shape. I'm not really sure what this is going to be, some kind of mutant monster, I think. So squeezing it downwards, and then I'm just going to use my needles to go in and felt that into place. And then I'm just going to check it, and oh look, this side's a bit lumpy compared to this side. This is narrower. So all I'm going to do is just squeeze this down and felt it down. And this works for things with armature as well. You have to be careful with the wires with armature, but I still use this technique when I'm making my mice or any kind of animal with an armature in, or any kind of person. The squeezing technique really does help me get a mirror image either side so that it's all looking lovely. I keep using the word symmetrical. If anybody can tell me another word that I can use other than symmetrical, that would be great. But it does really get everything looking the same. So the squeezing technique, give it a try and you will be pleasantly surprised.
Tip number three, This is when you're wrapping your armature and how to get everything looking nice and even and symmetrical.
This is a really simple technique to use when you're wrapping armature, and it just makes your life a lot more straightforward when you come to add additional layers to your sculpture later on. So a lot of the time what happens when people wrap armature is they'll end up, and this has happened to me when I started out needle felting as well, a lot of people will find that they'll end up with one limb slightly bigger than the other limb, and it's really incredibly frustrating. So this is what you need to do to avoid that, so you get everything looking the same. When you take your wool for wrapping the armature, make sure that it's nice and straight, it's nice and even, and the wool going through it is pretty much the same all the way through. So it's the same level of thickness, and you haven't got any kind of additional ends coming off here. It's sort of all the same length. Then what you want to do is just split it in half as even as possible. So you have two strips that are roughly the same size. So you take your sculpture and your wool, and you just need to remember where you start to position your wool initially. So I'm going to position my wool here, just over the shoulder of the armature. So I've got probably about 2 centimeters here going over the shoulder. So I'm going to hold that down in place, and I'm just going to wrap that round, and just make sure that you don't, like I say, just make sure that the wool doesn't twist on itself, because that's going to have an effect on everything as well. Because you have to remember that when you're wrapping armature, it's like the sculpture's underwear, and the underwear will make a big difference to the outerwear. So you want to make sure that it's looking nice and smooth, especially when you're creating things like hands, because that's going to get seen, isn't it? That's going to stand out to people. So you want to make sure that you get it nice and even looking. And then I'm just going to go down one more time to create a bit more thickness at the top, and then back up again. So I've gone down about 1 centimeter, and I'm just going to fold that away. So that's pretty straightforward. We've added the wool onto the sculpture, no dramas. Now the problems come when you add the second piece, because a lot of people tend to find that the second piece is never really the same kind of thickness, and you end up with all sorts of different sizes. So the key is to remember, how much wool did you have going over that shoulder a moment ago? So it was about 2 centimeters, wasn't it? So I'm just going to hold that down in place over the shoulder, and I'm going to wrap this. Again, just making sure that it's not twisting over itself all the way to the end. And obviously you want to make sure that your armature is symmetrical as well before you start adding the wool, because that will have a massive impact as well on the overall finish of your sculpture. So just keep wrapping all the way up. I appreciate I've got some wire exposed there, but just pretend that it's all covered nicely. And then back down again like we did a moment ago. And then back up. There you go, look at that. Nice and even and symmetrical. So that is how you get your wire armatures lovely and even when you wrap them, and it'll make your life a lot more easier when you come to add additional layers, because you've got these lovely symmetrical looking arms that are nice and even, and this will work for all parts of the wire armature. So the key things to remember are to use a piece of wool that's nice and even in terms of its thickness and its length, separate it as best you can 50-50, and always have the same amount of excess wool going over the edge of the armature, so when you come to wrap everything else, you will end up with lovely, beautiful, symmetrical limbs.
So I really hope you found this useful and you can take away some things from this to get your work looking more even and symmetrical. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. Thank you again, genuinely, for subscribing to my channel. It really helps me to make more videos. And if you have any questions or requests, please put them in the comments bar below, and I will try and make some videos for you covering your needle felting questions and quandaries. So I will see you tomorrow with more needle felting hints and tips. Until then, bye.